Hello everyone, my name is Lauren. I hope this video finds you well. I'm sure you can tell, but I am in a brand new space. I am in my new apartment. I moved in here very recently, just a few days ago, and not gonna lie, I am already really liking it. I am liking it way more than my last apartment for so many different reasons, but we are not gonna get into that today. Today I wanted to do an apartment hunting video. I wanted to show you all the apartments I looked at, all the apartments I toured. I want to tell you about all the prices and the rough locations of them, as well as the pros and cons of each apartment that I looked at. So I toured over 15 apartments in the city of Montreal. So I saw apartments of all different shapes and sizes in a bunch of different locations. And I want to give you as much detail as I possibly can in order to be as informative as possible. So if you're looking for an apartment in Montreal, hopefully this information will help you. This video will contain lots of videos and photos of all the apartments that I toured, so be sure to watch in order to see what each apartment looked like. But before we get into it, I wanted to first talk about my non-negotiables, all the things that I needed when I was searching for an apartment. My most important non-negotiable was I needed it to have a good location. I really wanted to find an apartment that was located on the Orange Metro line, but I didn't want it to be too far north. So I was kind of looking in the Mile End, Rosemont, Little Italy, Plateau area of Montreal. And I also did not want to be more than a 20-minute walk away from a metro station. The next thing I really wanted in an apartment was good lighting, preferably south-facing because that is the best for all daylight, but I was also willing to accept west-facing windows or east-facing windows. The last apartment that I just moved out of actually had north-facing windows, which made the apartment dark almost all the time. The best lighting I would get in that apartment would usually be in the afternoons, but it was very short-lived and it was really hard for me to live there. So I definitely needed to have good lighting in my next place. The next things I needed were a dishwasher and in-unit laundry. In-unit laundry to me, I've learned, is so freaking important. I love not having to go to a laundromat or having to pay for coin-operated machines in a building. So I really just wanted to have the machines already in my unit just for the pure convenience of it. I needed the apartment to be cat friendly because I have a cat. And my price limit was for an apartment where I'd be living alone, which were mostly one-bedroom apartments. My maximum price I was willing to pay was $1,650 a month because that is what I paid in my last apartment. Or if I was living in a roommate situation with other people, the maximum I was willing to pay for a room was $1,200 a month. And now, just to expand on the price even more, I was looking at a bunch of different options on what I was willing to accept when I was moving. I was willing to be very flexible, and I was looking at all sorts of different types of apartments. So mainly 3 categories of apartments. The first one was trying to find a one-bedroom apartment that I would live in alone. The second option would be finding a 2-bedroom apartment where I would live with one other person, so just one roommate. And the third option would be I filled a room that was already empty in an existing roommate situation. So there was already an apartment that had people living there and other roommates, and then there had an empty room that was available for rent, and I would just move into that empty room. So I toured apartments in all 3 of those categories, and I will explain which category each apartment fits in as we go on. But now let me get straight into it. We are going to get into all of the apartment tours. So I was looking for a lease starting in September because that was when my last lease ended. And I really started touring apartments around August. That was really when I went pedal to the metal and I toured tons of different units all in one weekend. But before that, the first unit I ever saw, I looked at it in about May or June. But it was very casual. I was just glancing around the market, seeing what was available. And the first apartment that came from that was this one here. So this apartment was a studio apartment. It was $1,500 a month, and I would be living alone in it. Pretty much the only pro of this apartment was the fact that it had a dishwasher. Unfortunately, everything else about it was a disadvantage. It was too far from any metro station. The closest metro was a 35-minute walk away, which for me was almost double the maximum I was willing to go. The appliances were not included in the apartment. So when I moved in, there would have been no fridge, oven, laundry, or air conditioning. I would have had to provide my own fridge and oven, which really was not going to work for me. And also just the principle of this apartment that I didn't like is, I know I said earlier that it was a studio, but the advertisement that I found online actually said that it was a 1-bedroom apartment. But then when I showed up, it was not a 1-bedroom apartment, it was a studio, and everything was all in one room. So just the deceit of that really rubbed me the wrong way, and I already had a distrust in the landlord just because of that decision. Clearly, I did not pursue this apartment any further. The next apartment that I toured was a 2-bed, 1-bath, plus a den, so it had 3 rooms. And this would have been a roommate situation where I would have shared the apartment with one other person, and the cost that I would have paid was $1,000 a month. So as I said, the apartment had 2 bedrooms plus a den, so the other roommate already took up one of the rooms, and I would have had the other bedroom and the den completely to myself, which would have been nice. I could have put my bed in the bedroom and then had a separate room for my office to have a good work-life balance separation. The pros of this unit were that it did have a dishwasher and it did have in-unit laundry, so already on a better foot than the last apartment I discussed. And also the location of this apartment was really good. It was a 10-minute walk from the Laurier Metro along the Orange Line. So the location was really, really good. I really liked it. But the cons of this apartment unfortunately outweighed the pros because I made the mistake of not checking the profile of who my roommate would be before I toured the apartment. So the tour ended up being a waste of time, unfortunately, because when I showed up to tour the apartment, the person that I would be living with was a man. And I'm non-binary, I go by they, them pronouns. And just the fact of living with a man is immediately unsettling to me. I mean, I've lived with men in the past, and I can't necessarily say that solely based off of gender can I tell if someone's going to be a good or a bad roommate. But the issue is that if I was going to be living with only one other person, I didn't feel comfortable having that one other person be a man. But unfortunately, the other con about this apartment was the fact that the apartment and the empty room that I would be moving into were dirty. And it didn't seem like the roommate or the landlord had any plans of cleaning it before I moved in, so that would have been 100% my responsibility. The kitchen was generally quite dirty, and then when I walked into the empty rooms that would have been mine, there was a lot of dirt on the floor and the walls were covered in smear marks and dirt and stuff. And I just really didn't want to have to clean that before I moved in. And I made a comment to the roommate about this, and he just kind of went, oh yeah. Like, not really addressing it. And then when I went to view the balcony at the back of the apartment, I was just looking out the window and I didn't even notice that there was trash on the balcony. I wasn't really paying attention to it. But I guess he thought that I noticed. So then he said, oh yeah, sorry, there's trash there. I haven't found the time or the energy to take it out yet. To be honest, that was also a red flag because it would show that my roommate would not be someone who is the cleanest. And I really value cleanliness in an apartment. I am a very clean person myself. So living with someone who was that dirty just wasn't really going to work for me. So I also ended up not pursuing this apartment. Next place I saw was another roommate situation. So this was a 4-bed, 1-bath. So I would have 3 other roommates that I'd be living with. And this was $700 a month for the empty room. So when I toured, all 4 of the bedrooms were empty. So there was nobody living in that unit because it was currently under renovation. And the person who showed me around the apartment was not actually the landlord. It was the son of the landlord. And the son didn't really know anything about what was going on, which understandable. He was just there to do the tour for me. So any questions that I had to text the landlord about. So when I toured the apartment, the pros were that it had a good location. It was a 10-minute walk from the Montréal Metro on the Orange Line, so good location. It did have in-unit laundry. It did have a dishwasher. And it also actually had a pretty nice outdoor space. It had a backyard that was pretty private. And it was a decent size, so that was something unique about this apartment that I liked. The cons were that the bedrooms were just very uneven in terms of quality. There were 2 bedrooms that were good and 2 bedrooms that were really bad, to be honest. And by the time that I was touring, I had no idea if any of the rooms had already been rented or not. So I was touring all 4 of the rooms that I thought were available, but I wasn't sure. Just kind of hoping that the ones that I liked the most, the 2 good ones, were the ones that were still available. And unfortunately, I'm sure you know where this is going, as I was leaving, I texted the landlord asking which rooms were available, and he said that 2 of the rooms were actually already rented. And I could make a pretty easy assumption that the 2 good rooms that I liked were available. I just could not handle living in one of the worst 2 rooms because one of them didn't have a closet, and then I'm pretty sure the other one did not have a window. And they were both very small in general, so it was just not going to work for me. Also, the apartment had no AC, which for me was not something that I needed, but it just kind of added to the list of other cons that I already didn't like about the apartment, so just further cementing that this was not the place for me. The next place I toured was a 1-bed, 1-bath apartment. It was $1,556 a month, and this would have been a lease transfer. So somebody was already living in this apartment, and they were trying to get out of their lease early by transferring it to a different person. Also, because this was a 1-bedroom apartment, I would be living here alone. So the pros of this apartment were that, once again, this place also had a good location. It was a 10-minute walk from the Montréal metro. The apartment had in-unit laundry and a dishwasher as well. Overall, I did like the space of this apartment. I found that it was more than enough space for me, my furniture, as a single person. And I did overall like this apartment quite a bit. I thought it was pretty nice. Another thing that was nice about it was that it also had an outdoor space that was pretty private. So the things that I didn't like about this apartment were, first of all, it was a unit in a half basement, so that made it pretty dark. And one of my non-negotiables was that I really wanted to have good lighting, so this was just something that I didn't love about this apartment. And the next thing that really made me decide to not pursue it was the fact that it was a lease transfer and the lease was expiring in March, which was only 6 months away, and I would have had to possibly deal with a rent increase upon the renewal of the lease. So the way that lease transfers work, let's say you sign a lease for January 1st that lasts a year, so until the next year's January 1st. Let's say you decide you want to move out in May. You can't necessarily just break your lease and stop paying. You have to transfer your lease to a new person for the remainder of the time that the lease is valid. So if you want to leave in May and you don't want to live there for the rest of the year, then you have to find somebody who will live there between May and January of that next year who will pay the rent and take the responsibilities off your hands. And that's what this person was doing, which in general is not an issue and it's not a red flag in any way. But every year, rent increases happen to accommodate with inflation and all sorts of other stuff. And so the rent prices will increase. You have to pay more every month for the same apartment. And because of that, I would have moved in September, and then less than 6 months later, the rent might have been increased. And doing the math on what the increase could be, I feel like after 6 months of moving in, I might actually would have been priced out of that apartment. And then come March, I would have had to move again. So this was not really something that I wanted to deal with, especially in March when there's still snow on the ground in Montreal. So this was really the nail in the coffin that ended up in me not pursuing the apartment. But luckily, the person trying to find someone to move in did find somebody else. So I know that he made it work in another way and he didn't necessarily need me to move in. So I'm glad that it worked out for him. But my search continued. The next apartment that I saw was another 1-bed, 1-bath that I would be living in alone. And the price was $1,278 a month, which was very appealing because for a 1-bedroom apartment in Montreal, that is a very good price. The pro of this apartment, because yes, there is unfortunately only one, was that everything in this apartment was extremely modern. Everything was freshly renovated up to date, and there was in-unit laundry and dishwasher as well. Everything was insanely modern and black and white and fancy, and it was pretty nice because I had never lived in an apartment like that before. But the cons really outweighed that one pro because as soon as I walked in, I realized how small the apartment was and how dark it was, because this apartment was on the ground floor and it was surrounded by trees, and it just made it very dark, so no natural light, and just especially the living room space was very small, and it would not be possible for me to fit my living room furniture in there and also have the little section where I need to work from home from and set up my desk in. So this apartment was immediately an automatic no. But the property manager who was showing me this apartment actually had other units available in the rough area. And so he ended up offering me another apartment to tour. So we got in his car and we drove to the next place, which was a 2-bed, 1-bath apartment, and it was $1,412 a month. But it was only going to be that price for the first year because it was on promotion, because they really wanted to get someone in for September. So they made it that much cheaper. But then the year after, it would have been $1,695 a month. And this would have been a situation where I would find a roommate to live in the second bedroom of this apartment, and I would live in the first bedroom. And so funny, I actually almost picked this apartment to live in. I was this close. I was 1 click away from signing the lease. But then we will get into the cons later that will describe why I decided to back out of moving here. So the pros of this apartment were that it had a decent location. It was about a 20-minute walk from the Laurier Metro, which was my absolute limit max. But I felt like it was a really nice walk, and there were also bike stations in the area, so I could also bike to the metro if I wanted to. This apartment was pretty much directly in between all of my closest friends and where they currently live in Montreal. Because in my old apartment, I lived very far away from all my friends. And so this apartment would have been perfectly situated smack dab in the middle of the triangle of my 3 closest friends. So that was very appealing to me. This apartment also had very good lighting. It had a dishwasher, it had in-unit laundry, and just like the last unit, everything in this unit was extremely modern and up to date. It was freshly renovated, so I would have been the first person to move in after the renovations. And also, because the price was so cheap for that first year, it would have been that much cheaper to share with a roommate. I think it only would have been about $700 per month per person if I had a roommate with me, dividing that $1,400 cost by 2. And that was extremely appealing to me, just going from what I was paying the year before to now paying that little amount was really tempting. And also, even if I didn't find a roommate, or I decided to change my mind and not have a roommate, I could also afford to live here alone for the first year. So I really felt like I had a lot of flexibility with this place. And so that was one of the things that really appealed me. And that's why I ended up applying to sign a lease for this apartment. But then here are the cons that ended up making me back out. The biggest con was that the second bedroom had no window. Like, it sort of did, because it had a window area, but the window went into the living space, not the outdoors. So there was light coming into the room in a way, but it wasn't natural sunlight, if you know what I mean. Comparing to the first bedroom, how much light was in that bedroom, and the fact that it had a balcony off of it, and then comparing it to the second bedroom, it just felt like it was so much worse. And I was worried about trying to find somebody who would be willing to rent out that room. The thing that I tried to justify myself for that was, oh, it'll be so cheap anyway that maybe somebody would be willing to pay a really low price to live in that room, especially if I increased the price of my room to compensate for their room and then make it that much cheaper. But at the end of the day, I thought about it and I thought, okay, if I was touring this empty room with no window, would I move in? And the answer was no. And so that's what decided it for me, and that's when I decided to back out of signing the lease. The other thing I was also concerned about was the price increase in the second year, because as I said earlier, the first year had a promotion on the price. So it was about $1,400 for the first year, but then it would have had about a $300 increase for the next year. But I was just concerned about the longevity of this place after year 1. And so those were the reasons why I ended up backing out, and I was back on the hunt, continuing to look for other options. The next place I toured was a 2-bed, 1-bath, and this was $1,850 a month. And I would have lived in the first room, and I would have found a roommate to live in the second bedroom available. The good things that I liked about this apartment were the location was pretty decent. It was a 10-minute walk from Rosemont Metro. The entire apartment had very good lighting, which I really, really liked. The location was also nice because it was literally across the street from one of the most popular cafes in Montreal, and it was on top of a very popular donut shop in Montreal. I'm sure those of you who live in the Mile-Land Plateau area know what I'm talking about when I say this, and you might know the apartment I'm talking about then. But yeah, just being able to be that close to some fun amenities like that would have been nice. Also, both of the bedrooms in this unit were both a good size and bright, which I really liked. So there wasn't necessarily a big difference between both bedrooms. They were both a decent size. One of them had classic regular windows, and then the other room had a kind of skylight thing that also let a lot of light in. So it was a very smart solution to the problem of not having any windows on the regular wall faces. The cons of this apartment were that this was the most expensive apartment I toured out of all of them. So, just right off the bat, that's something that I didn't love. And then obviously the logistics of trying to rent out the second bedroom. I don't think I would have had too much trouble besides the price. So that was one of the things that I was concerned about, was because the price was quite high. It would have been about $900 a month per bedroom. And I just wasn't sure if people were willing to pay that, especially because this apartment wasn't necessarily in the plateau core that I was necessarily looking for. And then the real killer that made it pretty much impossible for me to continue was my plan was to sign a 2-bedroom lease alone and then at a later date find a roommate to move in. The landlords for this apartment specifically told me that I needed to have a roommate in mind who would apply with me in order to sign the lease for the apartment. And because I still had not yet found a roommate and someone that I wanted to live with, it pretty much made it impossible for me to pursue this lease. Which was fine because, like I said, there were other cons that I was concerned about, so honestly, I wasn't too upset about it. Next apartment we're gonna look at is a 1-bed, 1-bath, and I would have been living alone. The price was $1,395 a month. The pros of this apartment were that it had in-unit laundry and a dishwasher. But the cons were quite outweighing the pros because the entire apartment was very dark. I'm not quite sure which way the windows were facing, but the apartment was on a ground floor and the backyard was full of trees. And so it made the bedroom very, very dark. The common area, so the living space, was also too small. So I would not have been able to fit my living room furniture and my office furniture in that one little living room space. Also, the apartment was generally damaged and dirty, but it just looked like the apartment was generally not well cared for. And to me, that's a sign of a bad landlord who isn't necessarily trying to make sure that their tenants are happy. They're just trying to rent out a space to get the money out of it. And so that was a concern for me when I was touring. And I pointed this out to the property manager and he kind of just went, oh yeah, I see what you mean, but obviously didn't offer any solutions. Just general damage around the apartment, things were not well cared for, things were not painted with care. And then I remember specifically the windows I was really concerned about. There was a lot of damage going on to the windows. All this damage and dirtiness were just things I didn't want to deal with. And then also combined with the darkness and the small size of the entire apartment, especially the common areas, I decided to not pursue this apartment. And so it was at this point that I really decided I don't think I want to live alone anymore. I think I really want to try to prioritize finding a roommate situation or an apartment where I can live with another person. And so pretty much most, if not all of the apartments going forward are all of my other options that are not 1-bedroom apartments. And I think at this point I actually canceled all of the tours I had scheduled for 1-bedroom apartments. The next place I saw was a 2-bed, 1-bath, where I would find a roommate for the second bedroom. The price was $1,866 a month total. The pros of this apartment were that it had a really great location. It was a 5-minute walk from the Montréal metro, and it was close to a ceramic cafe and lots of other regular cafes that I really loved in the area. And I already found myself in this area quite often anyway, so it would have been nice to just already be able to live on top of all that anyway. The apartment also had a dishwasher in it, and it had a very nice balcony outdoor space that I liked. So let's get into the cons of this apartment. Actually, reading my notes now, it was this apartment that was actually the most expensive of all the apartments that I toured. Also in the advertisement, it said that laundry was included, and in the pictures there were laundry machines. So that's why I agreed to tour, because there was in-unit laundry and it was one of my non-negotiables. But then when we actually got to the apartment, I found that there were no laundry machines to be found. And so I asked the landlord about this, who was touring me, and he said, oh yeah, the machines belonged to the last tenants, and so when they left, they brought them with them. And I said, well, that's a concern for me because I really need in-unit laundry. And he said, well, if you want, we, the landlords, can provide you with machines, but that will increase the cost of your rent by about $80 a month. So just be aware of that. So just already the fact that this apartment was so expensive, the most expensive one I had toured overall, and then they were going to make it even more expensive just to install laundry machines, just didn't really sit right with me. Also, it was questionable whether this apartment was pet friendly, because overall, all these other apartments I've been talking about have been pet friendly. It's a given. And obviously I have a cat and I'm not abandoning her anywhere. So she's gonna come with me. And so all the apartments I toured said that they were pet friendly, but this was the only one that I had a concern about. Because when we went out to look at the balcony area, there was a cat there. And obviously I made a big deal and I went, oh my gosh, a cat, so cute, so cute. And I brought it up to the landlord and the landlord said, oh, that shouldn't be happening. We don't allow cats in the building. Obviously that was a concern for me and I said, oh, I have a cat. Is this going to be a problem? And he said, oh no, actually we'll make an exception for specific cats and for specific people, which was weird to me because he seemed pretty certain that he wouldn't allow pets. But then as soon as I mentioned that I had a cat that obviously I was going to bring with me, he suddenly was willing to make an exception. So he just seemed a little wishy-washy, and just saying things like that made me not really trust him. Unfortunately, this was not the only bad vibe the landlord gave me. When I asked to take a video of the apartment for this one, I actually was told no. Out of all the other apartments I asked to take a video of, everybody said yes, even the people that were already living in the apartment. But this apartment was empty, no one was even living there, and the landlord still told me no. And when I pushed and when I asked, why can't I take a video? I don't understand. He said that he doesn't want anybody and everybody to have access to a video of the apartment, which was super weird to me. I just didn't understand. And I told him that that was weird and that I didn't understand. And he just said, well, this is just our rule. If you want to have videos or photos of the apartment, just look at the listing. Like, what he provided some. So that was just weird to me. Also, the landlord who was touring me was very young, like visibly young, to the point where I actually asked him at one point how old he was, and he refused to answer the question. If I were to guess, I'd probably say he's between the ages of 21 and 25, so extremely young. I have no idea how he got a hold of this property, but whatever. Just the thought of having my landlord be younger than me was a weird thing to think about. So with all of those things in mind, and especially considering the way the landlord was talking and the way he treated me, I ended up not pursuing this apartment. Next place I viewed was a 5-bed, 1-bath apartment. So I would have shared this apartment with 2 other people, and I would have paid $725 a month. And you're probably wondering, well, Lauren, if it's a 5-bedroom apartment, but you're only sharing it with 2 other people, how is that gonna work? And so basically I was told that because the price of the entire apartment is so cheap, it is much more comfortable to share the 5 rooms between 3 people rather than with 5 people. So with that, there were a bunch of rooms that were empty. It was one roommate was staying in this situation, but the other 2 were leaving. And so they were trying to find 2 other people to take up the empty 4 rooms. So I would have gotten 2 rooms to myself, one which I would have used as a bedroom, and then another one that I would have used as an office. And based on the timing of everything, if I had agreed to live here, I would have also had a say in who the 3rd roommate would have been, which would have been nice. The other pros of this apartment were, honestly, just good vibes. If you look at the video, you'll see that this apartment is different than a lot of the other ones that I've toured so far. It was very old type of Victorian style, I think. The hallway was painted a really dark green, which I actually really liked. Yes, it made the space more dark, but it made it moody and kind of unique from all the other places I toured that had just like beige, white, or gray walls. This apartment also had a nice balcony outdoor space that I really liked, and it was actually graffitied really cool. So again, adding to the good vibes that I really liked about this place. And obviously having roommates, it would have a built-in social aspect, which I was really looking for. So, just already having people to talk to. And because the 2 other roommates were leaving and there were 4 rooms up for grabs, I would have picked 2, and then the 3rd roommate would have picked 2. I actually would have been able to pick which 2 rooms I wanted, and then left the other 2 for the 3rd person who would have been moving in. So obviously having the 2 rooms all to myself, having that extra space would have been very nice. But there were 2 main cons that just made me decide to not pursue this apartment. The first one was that it had no laundry of any kind, not even coin-operated machines in the building. So if I wanted to do laundry, I would have needed to go to a laundromat a few blocks away. For me, unfortunately, it's just too much of a sacrifice that I'm not willing to make. So that really was the number one deciding factor for me in not pursuing. But the other con was the apartment in general had a little bit of wear and tear and disrepair that it seemed like the landlord hadn't taken care of. And during the entire tour, as I was pointing things out that were not repaired, he kept trying to blame the tenants for it and saying, oh, the tenants never told me that things needed repairing, so if I had known, I would have made the repairs, but nobody told me, which I didn't really trust. So I ended up reaching out to the roommate who was staying and asking him, is this true? Have you asked the landlords to make repairs? Has he made them? And to be fair, the tenant did tell me that yes, any repairs that he had requested or the roommates had requested, the landlord had followed through on. It was just a few things that needed fixing that they didn't even necessarily to bring up immediately. So that was kind of cleared up pretty quickly and it wouldn't have been a huge issue. So the deciding factor on me not moving forward was the lack of laundry in the building. We're in the home stretch now. I only have a few more apartments to talk about. But the next place was a 3-bed, 1-bath apartment. So this would have been another roommate situation. I would have shared this apartment with 2 other people, and my room would have cost $900 a month. Also, this apartment was a serious contender for me. I almost signed the lease for this one as well, but we will get into the cons later in deciding why I didn't go forward. So there is a long list of pros of things I really liked about this place. All the utilities were included, so hydro, electricity, everything was included in that $900 price. The unit had a dishwasher, it had in-unit laundry. Also, the space was entirely customizable. So the tenant that was living here had lived here for 8 years, and almost everything you see in the video, they had built themselves. And so this now gets into a point of contention with this apartment that is both a pro and a con, with the fact that the landlord of this apartment genuinely did not give a single fuck about what went on inside there. And yes, that's a pro because it allows you as a tenant to have so much flexibility and it allows you to kind of do whatever the hell you want with no questions asked. But also when major repairs do need to be made, the landlord was nowhere to be found. And also the landlord did insane price increases every year that were very frustrating. And that's why this apartment was $900 for 1 room. This landlord just seemed like a total asshole. And so the flexibility of everything and the customizability was a big pro, but then the lack of care from the landlord and lack of doing repairs was a con for this apartment. Some of the other pros were that the apartment was 1 minute away from the gym, which was very convenient and nice. And the bedroom had actually very good use of space, and the fact that they kind of made a loft area for the bed, so it was kind of floating in the air, and there's a ladder going up to it. And then there was extra space below the bed where you could put whatever you wanted, so a TV and couch or a desk area, which is what I would have done. This apartment would have been amazing for my social life. I really do believe that in another universe, I moved into this apartment because it was so nice for social. Both of the roommates I spoke to were extremely friendly and nice. And I ended up staying there for an hour, just talking to the roommate about things. And it was really nice, to be honest. They also told me that they threw a lot of parties there, which would have been super cool. They had plays that were enacted in this apartment, just all sorts of super cool stuff like that. Another thing about this apartment was that it would have been a sublease. So that basically means that in this apartment, there was 1 tenant who was on the lease officially, and it was the person who had lived there for 8 years. And unfortunately, they had tried doing lease transfers in the past, giving it to other people, or even just adding other people on to divide responsibilities. But every single time, the landlord refused. So this person basically decided, okay, whatever, I guess for the foreseeable future, I would just be doing constant subleases with a bunch of different people. And so that actually would have led to a lot of freedom for me, because yes, it would have meant I would have not had the same responsibilities or rights in a way as the main tenant on the lease. However, I would have had so much freedom where I would have been able to move kind of whenever I wanted on very short notice. And obviously, because it was a roommate situation, I would have sold a lot of my furniture if I chose that apartment. And so I would have been kind of living very light and free, which was honestly very appealing for me, because clearly I had a lot of flexibility in terms of the apartments I was looking at and the types of situations I wanted to enter into. And so this apartment really would have been that sort of freedom that I was kind of looking for. So that was a really big pro for me. Also, the next and final pro was how just amazingly show-stopping the living space of this apartment was. It was absolutely breathtaking, show-stopping, beautiful. I really think the living space of this apartment was the best apartment I have ever toured in my life, to be honest. And I remember sitting down on the couch and just looking around at the apartment and being in awe and telling the person touring me, honestly, I'm grateful just to be here. Just to be in this place and being able to see it. Even if I don't sign the lease, even if I don't move in, I'm just grateful to be in the presence of this space, to be honest. And they seemed very grateful, and they just seemed like a super cool person. So yeah, I very much appreciated the vibes of the place, all the changes that they had done. It really showed that they cared about the apartment, which I appreciated. And also, we were already talking about like some of the things that we would improve about the apartment if I were to move in, and just kind of the options that we would have. And I would be very hands-on in helping construct, which was something I was kind of looking at doing. I enjoy cleaning and renovating, so it would have been nice to kind of flex that muscle and partake in that hobby a bit more. Unfortunately, the cons just ended up in me deciding to pick a different apartment to move into. The bedroom was pretty small, and unfortunately in it, there was no room to the outdoors. Again, just like one of the previous apartments, these bedrooms in this apartment all had windows leading out into the common space, which itself was extremely bright and beautiful, but it just was not enough light for what I was looking for, especially in a roommate situation where I'd probably be spending a lot of time in my room more than when I lived alone. So just the darkness of that, I worried would have an effect on me. And then the size of the room, because yes, they did amazingly maximize the space of that room, pretty much to the best of their ability, but I was still concerned about being able to fit my desk in that under the bed area. Also, the apartment had amazing windows in the common space. However, there were no screens to stop my cat from getting out of the window, and just the idea of my cat wandering onto the ledge of an apartment that was on the 3rd story of a tall building, and then me having to go get her out there because there was no screen keeping her inside, was just a fear I really didn't want to risk. And the roommate tried to assure me in saying that we could build a screen together, which definitely reassured me and did make me feel better, but just another thing to add on top of the other cons that I had. And so the reason I ended up not pursuing this apartment was because of the size of the main room. And yeah, that was pretty much the only thing that stopped me from living here. So I moved on to the next place, which was a 2-bed, 1-bath. So I would have found a roommate for the 2nd bedroom. And this was $1,550 a month altogether. So I could actually also afford to live alone in this apartment if I decided to either not get a roommate or if I wasn't able to find a roommate. The pros of this apartment were it had a good location. It was a 10-minute walk from the Montréal metro. And also the 1st bedroom was bright and pretty decently sized. So I really appreciated that about the apartment. Another pro of this apartment was that it did have in-unit laundry and the bathroom. Unfortunately, the cons really outweighed the pros because none of the utilities were included in that price. So I would have needed to add on internet and hydro and heat and everything, which wasn't really appealing. Also, the space was generally very dark everywhere besides that 1st bedroom. So the living room was very dark, and the 2nd bedroom had no window in it, so also making it very dark. So again, I was concerned about trying to fill a room in an apartment that didn't have a window. especially for a roommate that prioritized light like me. If I had to live in that room, I'd be very unhappy. So I didn't love the idea of trying to force someone to live in that room. Also, the apartment was overall dirty and needed quite a lot of repairs, and I pointed them out to the person touring me, and again, it didn't seem like much would be done about it. I didn't love that. We are finally at the last apartment that I toured. This was a 2-bed, 1-bath, so I would have been living with a roommate, and it was $1,847 a month. This apartment was probably the biggest apartment I toured out of all of them. To be honest, this apartment was pretty massive, especially for the location. It was a 4-minute walk from Laurier Metro, so it was an absolutely great location. To be honest, it was my dream location when I was touring. So I was very intrigued by that. And then, of course, as you'll see in the video, how big the entire apartment is. Both of the bedrooms are a very good size. The first bedroom was really big, and then the second bedroom was a little bit smaller, but it did have a huge walk-in closet, which would have been a huge plus when trying to fill that room with a roommate. The apartment also had in-unit laundry and had a dishwasher, and just generally around the entire place, there was tons of storage areas. So there would have been lots of places to store anything that you would have needed to. Unfortunately, the biggest con of this apartment that ended up in me deciding not to pursue it was the fact that it was a basement unit. And one of the things that I needed in touring apartments, especially when I was going to sign one, was I needed it to have good lighting, especially, like I said, coming off of my last place that had really terrible lighting. So for me, basement apartments were kind of a deal breaker for me. So when I was touring, yes, I didn't really help myself because I toured this apartment at night. So I obviously didn't really give it the benefit of the doubt. Even when I was touring around, I was looking at the windows and the way they were placed. And it was kind of a basement, sort of half basement situation going on. And I just felt like there would have been no natural lighting during the day. And so that is really the main reason why I decided to not pursue this apartment. Also because the price was so high, it would have been a little bit more than $900 a month per room. Obviously, I would have only had one roommate, but trying to find somebody who was willing to pay $900 a month for a room in a half basement just didn't seem the most appealing to me. So that's why I ended up not pursuing this apartment. So I am so out of breath, but we are finally at the end of all the apartments that I toured, minus one. And that is the apartment that I live in now, the apartment that I ended up deciding on. I did not include it in this video because I do want to do a specific apartment tour. So expect that from me very soon. I'll be posting an apartment tour showing this apartment in its entirety. And it's so exciting. I really do feel like I found the perfect place of all the things that I was looking for. It has a really good location. It has a lot of the amenities that I was looking for. So I'm very excited to show you it. I just had to finish decorating. My room is almost done pretty much. That's what you're looking at here. But I do have to do some improvements on the living space. But as soon as I am done, I will be filming that video. So you can probably expect it in either October or November. I hope this information was helpful in this video. I am very lucky to be able to afford places like this, and I'm just very glad that I had a really good process this time. A lot of the apartments I toured were very nice, and I do feel like I had a lot of good options, and I had backups for my backups, which I really liked. And I also wanted to tour as many apartments as I could, not only for myself, giving myself that many options, but I wanted to show you guys as many apartments as I could in an area that is very sought after. So I hope you found it interesting. I hope you found at least part of it useful. And if you have any questions, if you want to talk about any of your experiences apartment hunting in Montreal, feel free to let me know in the comments below. But that is it from me for now. I will see you next time. I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, night, whatever time it is for you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!